Ever since Disney's Wish first came out, the movie hasn't exactly been loved by many fans. Now, I know I said in my review of the movie, which you can find a link in the description to, that I actually liked it and even thought it was a step in the right direction for Disney. And the thing is, I still stand by pretty much everything I said in that video. But at the same time, I can also see where a lot of the issues people have with the movie are coming from a lot better the longer I've had to think about it. Because simply put, Wish is not exactly a masterpiece of screenwriting. And today, using both my experience in writing books and just as a plain old Disney fan, I would like to try and explore where exactly it is that Wish missed the mark, especially when it comes to being the movie made to celebrate Disney's 100-year anniversary. And obviously there are going to be major spoilers for this movie ahead, so in case you haven't seen it yet and don't want anything ruined, you should probably come back to this video after you have watched it. Okay. So to get right into it, if there was one word to describe what the biggest problem with Wish is, I would say confused. Because it feels like this movie really wants to be a Pixar movie, but also desperately wants to be a Disney movie because it's being created as a celebration of the Disney company. Because as I've argued in many other videos, Disney and Pixar actually have very different styles of storytelling, but in the 2010s, Disney started adapting Pixar's style more and more, to the point that the two were barely discernible from each other in many regards. So when something like Wish comes along, and they feel they have to make it a Disney movie, they really don't know how to anymore, and the result is a movie that at once feels like it's desperately trying not to be Pixar, but at the same time doesn't quite know how to be Disney either. That's why in my original review, I even compared Wish unfavorably to Once Upon a Studio, because that short knew exactly what Disney truly is and was able to capture the Disney magic flawlessly. As I said in my review on the short, it wasn't trying to be Disney. It simply was Disney. And the results speak for themselves. Especially when you compare it to Wish, which is instead trying desperately to feel like Disney, but doesn't entirely understand how. In fact, the movie feels so off in this regard that many have even suggested, if usually in a joking manner, that it was written by AI. And I'm just going to come out and say it. No matter how bad you believe the movie was, it was not written by AI. If it were, it would have been so much worse. But once again, I can see why people would draw the comparison. Because the thing about AI is, it only knows what you tell it. And even then, it still doesn't understand the inner workings of it. For example, you can tell it that 2 plus 2 equals 4, but it won't understand why. If you tell it 2 plus 2 equals 5, it will continue to insist that no matter how much evidence you produce to the contrary, because that's what it was told. Not unless you also give it a deep-rooted explanation of why math works that way, why 2 plus 2 does equal 4. And modern Disney writers have more or less the same problem. They just don't seem to understand what exactly it was that made the Disney classics so beloved. They can watch them and try to copy from them all they want. But unless they actually understand Disney's style of filmmaking, it's never going to turn out 100% right. And again, because AI tends to have similar problems, it's very easy to see where this comparison is coming from. To put it simply, I believe the biggest issue this movie has is that it wants to be a Pixar movie like other recent Disney movies, but knows that it can't be and is trying to mimic a style that it doesn't fully understand. And for perhaps the best example of that in the entire movie, there's King Magnifico. Now, remember I said at the start that if there's one word that sums up this movie, it's confused? Well, the exact same applies to King Magnifico. Because if they really wanted him to be a classic Disney villain, they would have had him be unambiguously evil from the start. Sure, maybe he would have started out as a jerk and then turned into a huge jerk, but the point is that it would have been obvious from the moment he appeared, or maybe even when his name is first mentioned, that the audience knows he can't be trusted. But that's not what they do. Instead, they depict him as having a troubled backstory and a benevolent king, then have him start to break down when shown resistance before finally succumbing to evil. But then the narrative tries to retroactively backtrack and make it as if Magnifico were evil the whole time. To put it simply, Magnifico's characterization is all over the place, and that's because the movie is trying to be one thing but wants to be another. Because I guarantee you that if this were any other movie, Magnifico would have been a twist villain. And it's extremely obvious at first that's what the writers want him to be. But because they also want him to be a classic Disney villain, they end up setting him up one way and presenting him another. And it's for this reason that many have sided with him or tried to argue that he was actually right, because the narrative does such a messy job of explaining his character. To put it another way, here's how the narrative wants you to see Magnifico's conversation with Asha. Magnifico takes people's wishes and makes them forget what they are, promising to grant some of them one day. He refuses to grant wishes that he deems dangerous and keeps all of them for himself because he wants to have total control over everything, and it makes him feel big and important to be in charge of something so valuable. And Asha's point of contention is that if he isn't going to grant somebody's wish, he should give it back to them so they can at least remember what it is, and even try to make it come true themselves if they'd like. But again, because that would make him feel less powerful and important, he refuses to do so. And let me just once again emphasize, the narrative isn't arguing that Magnifico is wrong for not granting certain wishes. That is not why he's in the wrong. It's the fact that he won't give the wishes he's not going to grant back to their owners, basically giving them false hope and letting them live their entire lives without any chance of their wish coming true, or even the luxury of knowing what it was. That's Asha's point of contention. That is why he's in the wrong. The only problem is, because the movie has a problem articulating this, it doesn't come across that way to many people. Instead, the movie can easily come across as Magnifico being a wise ruler and Asha being a brat who simply can't accept that he's not going to grant her grandfather's wish. But again, that's not what the writers had in mind. And because it doesn't do a good job of selling the stakes of Magnifico hoarding the wishes in that scene, it can make Asha's son, This Wish, come across as melodramatic at best and downright selfish at worst. As once again, it can feel like she's majorly overreacting because the movie doesn't spell out in black and white why Magnifico is wrong. And as a result, it can then also make it look as if Asha pushed him off the deep end and made him resort to using black magic, rather than her calling him out for the narcissist that he is and simply showing his true colors now that his power has been challenged. Because again, that's how the narrative wants you to view him, but doesn't make that characterization very clear. And what only makes this problem even worse is in the depiction of the Queen, because she was written to be Magnifico's conscience and constantly trying to hold his villainy back. It only sends even more mixed signals regarding his character. And not to mention, once the book gets involved, then it's all over the place, because the movie can't seem to make up its mind on whether he was always pure evil and is just now starting to show it, or if he was at one point a good man and is now slowly succumbing to his darker nature. But what also doesn't help is that the Queen herself doesn't work as a character even more than Magnifico. What are her motivations? What does she truly feel for her husband? No answer is ever given. And without these crucial answers, it almost makes her feel as if she's getting in the way of Asha and Magnifico more than anything else. Because here's the thing. Part of what made Disney villain sidekicks so fun and compelling was that they generally encouraged the villains' plots. They were actively trying to help them with their evil deeds. And, as I got into in another video, which you can find a link in the description to, were often a lot smarter at carrying that out than they're generally given credit for. And even when they weren't so enthusiastic, they still had absolutely no problem carrying out the villain's plans and tended to provide quite a bit of comic relief in doing so. But because the Queen is a very serious character and tries to stop Magnifico at every turn, she can easily come across as an anti-Disney villain sidekick. And considering those were generally well-liked and beloved characters. But on the other side of the spectrum, she doesn't really work as an inside woman working against Magnifico either. I mean, compare her to, say, Lucilla from Gladiator. In that movie, her motivations are quite clear. She's terrified of Commodus and the threat he poses to both her and her son, so she puts on a front that she knows he wants to see while secretly working against him. And her characterization works perfectly, in part because she knows she can't control Commodus and doesn't even attempt it, which makes her situation all the more desperate and perfectly shows why she would go to such lengths to stop him. The point here is, Lucilla is an actual human being who works as a character. Her relationship with Commodus, how she feels about him, and why she does what she does are all perfectly spelled out and make complete sense. The Queen in Wish has none of this, especially the fact that she repeatedly tries to control Magnifico before plotting against him once that doesn't work anymore, only serves as a detriment to her character, to the point that she feels like she exists just for the sake of it, rather than for any actual plot-related reason, as in the end she doesn't contribute anything of substance. And once again, her depiction only helps to make Magnifico's even more confusing as well, which is the biggest point of contention with the movie, and therefore the reason I've chosen to dedicate so much time to it. Because when you really look at it, King Magnifico represents the whole problem with the movie in a nutshell. The writers want him to be two different things at the same time, don't articulate his personality and motivations correctly, and in the end desperately tries to salvage what they originally had in mind for him by trying to make him as evil as possible without explaining his previous behavior. And to a lesser extent, the same can be said about pretty much everything else in the movie as well. Because the writers are so confused on what they want certain things to be, the narrative isn't able to properly explain it. Now, obviously, I was able to get the gist of the whole thing, which is how I've been able to explain many things about it here, and probably why I still enjoyed it more than most. But again, I can see where a lot of people's complaints with the movie are coming from too. Because again, if the narrative is confused or indecisive about pretty much everything, what is the audience supposed to take away from it? But all that being said, to give some credit to the writers, they did seem to be a lot more on track as far as the Disney style went in earlier drafts of the script. Like, for example, Star was supposed to be a Peter Pan type character and a potential love interest for Asha. And not only do I think on the whole that would have been much better, as that sounds like a more compelling story, but it also would have made the movie a lot less confusing. Because I even said in my original review of the movie that the biggest problem with Star was that he could barely articulate anything. By having him be an actual character who could speak, it would have allowed him to explain the more confusing elements of the movie, up to and including why Magnifico was so wrong to hoard the wishes, and maybe even explain the evil he's seen him do in the past, if they were that committed to making him pure evil. Even if you want to disregard everything else, they would have been better off depicting him that way for that reason alone. And not to mention, the Queen was supposed to be Magnifico's partner in crime, and just as evil as he was. But then the writers decided they wanted her to be his conscience. And as I just went on at length about, that's probably the worst decision they made in the entire movie. Because not only was that detrimental to her character, but Magnifico's as well, because it just muddied the waters even further on how evil he's supposed to be. My point here is, it seems that in earlier drafts, the writers had a much better grasp on how to actually write a Disney movie, but then couldn't help themselves and let Pixar's influence and writing styles start to get in the way. And once again, the results lead to a very confused narrative. Because I said it before, and I'll say it again, there are very few things the narrative is definitive about. And because of that, it can leave the audience downright confused as to what's exactly at stake or how they're supposed to feel about the characters. And to go back to what I was saying before, if they had just committed to Magnifico being evil from the word go, that by itself would have cleared up so much and made a lot of things much easier to understand. But because the movie decides to play games with him first, possibly because even it doesn't quite know what to make of him, it arguably messes up the entire movie. Now, I'm not saying that Magnifico's confusing depiction alone is what makes the movie hard to follow, as it's definitely confused about a couple of different things, but that is still far and away the worst offender. And once again, I believe the main source of all this confusion in the narrative simply comes from the writers of the movie preferring Pixar's style of storytelling, but wanting to tell a story in Disney's style. And the result is a mating of the two that works about as well as the blue and pink dress from Sleeping Beauty. This is why I believe, in many ways, the narrative is all over the place. And all I have to say to this is, if the writers love doing Pixar movies so much, then they should just stick to doing Pixar movies and get their hands on some writers that actually understand what Disney magic really is. Because that's clearly what they did for Once Upon a Studio. And look at how absolutely perfect that was. Just because the people behind it both loved and understood Disney. If they had been allowed to write Wish 2, then I'm pretty sure the movie would have ended up a Disney masterpiece. I have no doubt about that. But instead, we got a movie that's okay, but also left many both angry and perplexed because of how confused the writers themselves were about what they wanted it to be. Okay, I think that's everything I had to say. So now I want to hear what you guys think. Do you believe the main reason many find Wish hard to understand or appreciate is because of how confused the narrative is, which was in turn caused by the writers being too influenced by Pixar? Or do you believe it had nothing to do with that? Or do you think there was no issue with it at all? However you feel, please feel free to let me know in the comments below. And please remember that you do not have to agree with any opinions expressed in this video. You are free to feel absolutely any way that you want to about Wish, and if you think I was completely wrong with what I said, that's totally fine. And thank you all for watching. It is very much appreciated, and I hope to see you all next time.